All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're opening up our visual notebook to map out the incredible political, religious, and ecological web of Frank Herbert's universe, Dune. You know, to really do this masterpiece justice, we need to strip away all the noise and look exactly at how power works on the desert planet of Arrakis. We're going to treat this like a masterclass in cosmic manipulation.
You see, to truly grasp Paul Atreides' journey, we have to understand that in this universe, absolutely nothing exists in a vacuum. It's like a giant interconnecting puzzle. A change in the ecosystem ripples directly into the economy, which then dictates the politics, which, as we'll see, is secretly being steered by religious engineering.
So, here's our sketchnote roadmap for today. We'll be covering 1. The Imperial Trap, 2. The Bene Gesserit Plan, 3. Arrakis and ecology, 4. The Fremen, 5. Religion as a weapon, and finally, number 6, seizing the universe.
Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, the Imperial Political Trap, or the Jaws of the Emperor's Scheme.
Now, the trap itself is brilliantly simple. The Padishah Emperor grew incredibly jealous of Duke Leto Atreides, mainly because of his honor and his massive popularity. So what does he do? Well, he hands Leto the most valuable planet in the universe, Arrakis, knowing full well it's a completely unwinnable position. The previous rulers, the brutal and insanely wealthy Harkonnens, are already plotting a return. They even subvert the Atreides' most trusted doctor, using him to drop the planetary shields for the Emperor's elite super soldiers. Duke Leto absolutely knows it's a trap, but his only real hope is to cultivate something he calls desert power, by allying with the planet's fierce native people.
And as we've sketched out on this timeline, the downfall happens at an absolute breakneck pace. I mean, we go from their super tense arrival on Arrakis, where Paul narrowly survives an assassination attempt right in his bedroom, to devastating betrayal just weeks later. Duke Leto is killed, and Paul and his mother Jessica are forced to flee into the harsh sands just to survive. Over the coming years, Paul transforms into the Fremen leader, Muad'Dib. The trap is sprung flawlessly, but the Harkonnens and the Emperor completely fail to account for what Paul actually becomes out there in the deep desert.
But you know, there are much older forces operating behind the scenes. That brings us to Section 2, the Bene Gesserit breeding plan, the invisible strings.
To really understand this plan, we have to look at the Gom Jabbar. It's a key term we've jotted down in our notebook here. This is a visceral, terrifying test that Paul endures before he ever even leaves his homeworld. He is forced to put his hand inside a box that simulates his flesh crisping and burning away. If he acts on mere animal instinct and pulls his hand away, he'll be instantly killed with a poison needle held right at his neck. It's this brutal sifting process the Sisterhood uses to separate conscious humans from reactive animals.
And this brings us to the philosophical anchor of his entire training, the litany against fear. It's the exact mantra Paul uses to survive the Gom Jabbar. He permits the fear to pass over him and through him, maintaining absolute bodily control. It's a fascinating psychological tool, right? Acknowledging fear without letting it dictate your actions. That's something incredibly powerful you could even apply to our own anxieties today.
Now, what's really wild is that Paul is the unintended culmination of this massive, centuries-long breeding program. The Bene Gesserit had been manipulating bloodlines for generations to produce a messiah figure called the Kwisatz Haderach. But Paul's mother was supposed to have a daughter, and instead she had a son, arriving at this genetic pinnacle a whole generation too early. Because of this, Paul possesses terrifying, unpredictable potential, a male who can look into the dark places of time where the Bene Gesserit women are completely blind.
All right, let's zoom in on the physical planet itself. Section 3, Arrakis, Ecology and Spice, the hostile engine of the Imperium.
Because Arrakis is really defined by just one thing: the spice, melange. Without this highly addictive resource, which is only found deep in these sandworm-infested deserts, the entire imperial economy would just collapse. Guild navigators absolutely require it to safely fold space and travel. Simply put, if the spice stops flowing, the universe stands still. But right in the middle of all this violent spice mining, there's a totally different hidden agenda. The Imperial planetologists hold a secret 350-year blueprint to terraform Arrakis from a wasteland into a lush, green paradise. I mean, think about that multi-generational patience for a second. They literally calculate that if they can get just 3% of the green plant element involved in the carbon cycle, the entire ecosystem will become self-sustaining. And to actually pull this off, they are harnessing the native Fremen as an unstoppable, patient ecological force.
So let's see how all this builds into Paul's survival. Moving on to Section 4, the Fremen and Muad'Dib.
Survival in the Sietch.
When Paul and his mother are driven out into the desert, Paul's journey requires him to shed his ducal past, step by step. First, they're intercepted by a Fremen troop led by Stilgar. To secure sanctuary for them both, Paul is forced into a brutal ritual knife fight to the death with a Fremen named Jamis. Winning this fight is basically his brutal baptism. He's fully accepted into the tribe, he's given the secret name Usul, and he chooses his public name Muad'Dib, naming himself after the surprisingly resilient little desert mouse.
And this brings us to a really profound turning point. At emotional peaks, like Jamis's funeral, Paul's simple act of shedding a tear breaks incredibly deep cultural taboos. On Arrakis, a dead body's water belongs to the tribe, and weeping is practically unheard of because water is so precious. When Paul cries for the man he just killed, he earns ultimate reverence from the awestruck Fremen, who whisper in shock that he gives his own moisture to the dead.
Which perfectly sets the stage for our next block. Section 5, Religion as a Weapon, the Engineered Prophecy.
Now, here is where things get truly explosive. As we've mapped out in this table, we have the genuine, harsh reality of Fremen culture, a people who survive by brutal necessity and have unshakable loyalty to their tribe, colliding head-on with the Bene Gesserit's Missionaria Protectiva. Centuries ago, the Bene Gesserit deliberately seeded myths of an off-world savior into the Fremen culture as a sort of psychological safety net for stranded sisters. When Paul arrives, he flawlessly exploits these pre-planted superstitions. He merges their fierce survival instincts with fanatical religious devotion, pointing them directly toward a massive holy war.
But here's the kicker. Paul doesn't just weaponize religion. He weaponizes the ecology itself. He discovers a terrifying loophole in the planet's life cycle. If he takes the water of life, which is a lethal poison derived from a dying sandworm, and plants it above a developing pre-spice mass deep underground, it triggers a devastating chain reaction. It literally creates the water of death, which would permanently annihilate the sandworms and end all spice production in the universe. It is the absolute ultimate nuclear option.
Okay, it is time for the climax. Let's dive into Section 6, Seizing the Universe, the Inescapable Trap.
The Emperor, the Harkonnens, the Spacing Guild, they all descend on Arrakis, thinking they hold all the cards because of their vast armies and wealth. But Paul realizes a chilling core philosophy of power. He sees that true control doesn't actually come from military might at all. As he puts it so perfectly, he who can destroy a thing has the real control of it.
By threatening to unleash the water of death, Paul essentially holds the very ecosystem of Arrakis hostage. Without the spice, the Spacing Guild navigators are entirely blind, completely unable to plot safe courses through space. Because of this, the Guild is forced to strand the Emperor's massive armies in orbit. The Emperor Shaddam IV is completely cornered on the ground. By neutralizing the most powerful institutions in the entire galaxy through this insane ecological hostage situation, Paul takes the throne, backed by legions of fanatical Fremen who literally worship him as a god.
So we're going to leave you with this final provocative thought from our notebook today. Paul defeats the brutal Harkonnens and the manipulative emperor, but to pull it off, he exploits an indigenous religion, unleashes a terrifying holy war, and threatens the total destruction of an entire planetary ecosystem. When a political trap forces a man to command the universe by basically holding a knife to its throat, whose justice is truly being served? Think on that for a bit, and thanks so much for exploring the intricate web of Arrakis with us in this explainer.